Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. I'm Bad as Fish 80 and today we've got some Minion Masters patch news for you. We're going to be looking at patch 1.36, which is the third patch in the Frost Dragon's Lair expansion. The third and final. Let's dive in and see what we're going to find. Okay, so version 1.36. This is going to drop on Thursday the 2nd of June. We're going to have, as always, 2 new cards, some new cosmetics, some balance changes, and some bug fixes. And we're going to cover each and every one of those sections in turn. So first thing we're going to look at is the new cards. Now, Frostbearer. As you'd probably imagine, the Frostbearer does for Frost what the Cursebearer does for Curse. So let's have a little bit of a look at this chap. So it has the same stats as a Cursebearer, but it does cost 1 mana more. You can only have 1 copy of it, 1 copy allowed. So 300 HP, does 60 damage every 2 seconds. But that's where it's slightly different from the Cursebearer. Now instead of having Curse, it's Frozen. So this guy summons as Frozen, so that means when you spawn it, for the first 3 seconds, it's frozen, so it cannot move or attack, but it will take less damage and also less healing. Now, it also has a frozen aura. So remember from the last patch we had Bolf, Chief Icebreaker Bolf. He had a Revelry ability where he would drop an ice field, a frost field on the ground. The Frostbearer works similarly, but instead of dropping it on the ground, it's an aura, so it stays with the unit, just like the Curse aura stays with the Cursebearer. So if we remind ourselves what the frozen aura or the frost field does, so any enemies within it are slowed. Any enemies that stay in it for 3 seconds become frozen. And again, that means they can't move, they can't attack, they take less damage and less healing. So, he does for Frost what the Cursebearer does for Curse. And this is what the Frostbearer looks like in the game. Okay, so that's the first of the new cards. The second of the new cards is Rimmergal's Breath. Now remember, the big blue dragon, Rimmergal, Scourge of the Summit, that's been the centerpiece of this Frost Dragon's Lair expansion, and now we have Rimmergal's Breath. We have, of course, already Nirvir's Breath, now we have Rimmergal's Breath. Now this is a 5 mana spell, does 200 damage, 20 to face. You can only have 1 copy of it. And what does it do? It covers 2 large areas with Rime Fire. Now, if you remember, the way Nirvir's Breath works is it casts the spell horizontally across the arena. Now, Rimmergal's Breath is different. It's vertical, and there's 2 vertical stripes of this. Basically, when you're spawning it, the stripes will start in the middle, and then as you move one further forward in the enemy side of the arena, the other one will then move further back in your side of the arena. And then when you cast it, boom. Those are the 2 large areas. Now, if we remember, Rime Fire is the attack that Rimmergal has itself, which means that enemies that stay within Rime Fire for 3 seconds or more become frozen. Okay, so that's the 2 new cards. We've got the Frostbearer and we've got Rimmergal's Breath. Now, let's dive into the new cosmetics. And this is a skin that I am really liking the look of. We've got the Crystal Wrecked. This is definitely not just a simple recolor. We've got a lot of new design there on the Wreck skin. That's something I'll be looking forward to earning, of course, and grabbing from the Battle Pass. Now, as well as with the new skin, we've also got a new emote, the Bone Chilling Puff. Of course, a little puff representation of the Frostbearer. And also we have a new avatar, which is the Frostbearer avatar. Now, the screenshot here doesn't do it justice. It's got like a little wrinkly effect to suggest that it's freezing. So check that out in the game. Looks really nice. Okay, so new cosmetics done. Let's look at the balance. So as always, we'll look at the buffs, the rebalances, and the nerfs. Now, the rebalances are things that are getting totally reworked or changed in multiple ways, so it's not obviously a buff or a nerf. So the first thing we'll look at are the buffs. Now, Bladestar, of course, has been fairly contentious recently, where it was kind of bugged when they changed it, so it wasn't bouncing off of units and it was doing just insane amount of damage. It's not as insane as it used to be. It's getting a small damage buff, which I'm fairly surprised about, but just a little bit more damage there, doing 110 instead of 100. Now, the Bladestar is quite a skillful card, where if you can get the bounce perfect, it can do insane amount of damage. Other times, not so much, but we'll see how that goes. Now we have, as we were speaking about just a little while ago, Chief Icebreaker Bolf, one of the newer cards in the game. So he's getting a small damage increase, so his attack cooldown is going down from 2.5 seconds to 2.2 seconds. He's going to attack more quickly, overall higher DPS, so 40 up to 45.5 DPS. Now we have a cast delay reduction for the Impetus Blast. Now remember, the Impetus Blast is the spell that knocks things back, basically. And that's getting a small cast delay down from a second to 0.5 seconds. Just a small buff. Magma Storm. Magma Storm has been getting quite a lot of love in the patches recently. It's getting some more love here. Not entirely sure why, if it was necessary or not, but the Magma Rocks going up from 11. Previously they'd gone up from 10 to 11. Now they're going up from 11 to 12. And again, another card that we mentioned a little while ago, Rimagal, the big blue dragon. Now, Rimagal is going to have a damage increase, only a small damage increase, going up from 400 to 420. Blaze it. Now, the next one is quite a strange change. We've got the Rockin' Roller. Not a card we see very often, except within ritual decks, really. Again, a small cast delay from a second to 0.5 seconds. It's kind of a strange one because it's not going to change whether you use it or not. You're either going to use it if it's appropriate in your ritual deck, or if you're not playing a ritual deck, you're not going to use it. But just a small buff nevertheless. And again, following on with the cast delay reduction, Stun Blast also getting a cast delay from 1 second to 0.5 seconds. Okay, so those are the buffs. Now we're going to look at the rebalances, and as mentioned, rebalances are cards that are not obviously a buff or a nerf or have been changed altogether. Now this is a big change to Call to Arms. Now Call to Arms is a card that has received a lot of changes recently, trying to find its place. It's previously been too weak, then too strong, and now it's being changed kind of entirely. So previously the essence of the card is it would change your buildings into units. Originally they were warriors, and then there were some changes where you would get lesser Empyrean units. Now what they're going to do is this will affect one building. So it's a spell, you cast it. It's the closest building, or the building that's within the cast area. It will heal that building for 15% of its max health, and then it will summon a warrior and 2 crossbow dudes. So remember, as mentioned, only going to affect one building. So which are the buildings that could really help? Well, for example, here I thought about the Cage Prowler. Remember the Cage Prowler, if it takes 130 damage, the Prowler doesn't spawn. Well, guess what? You could use this to heal. Heal's kind of a strange word for a building. But yeah, you could use this to heal the building. So in previous situations where the Cage Prowler would die, it would now spawn. So for example, you could heal this after the Cage Prowler took a fireball, and assuming my maths is correct, the Prowler would still spawn. So it'd be interesting to see how people use the Call to Arms, which buildings they decide are most valuable. Do you want the extra health, building health, to spit out some more units from your spawner buildings or defensive buildings? We'll see how people decide to use them. So that's a big change to Call to Arms. I'm looking forward to seeing that, and we'll see what people feel about that. Now, another change to Combustion. So this isn't changing Combustion quite as dramatically as Call to Arms was changed, but it is receiving some changes. So now it will only target one minion. So previously you could cast it on however many minions were in the area. So now it will only be targeted on one minion. It's going to do true damage to itself and regular damage to enemies. And remember, true damage to itself means that you can't negate that damage with a shield, divine shield, anything like that. So it's 200 damage to itself and to enemies. It's going to receive a master damage reduction from 50% to 10%. But one of the big changes here is that previously combustion would do 50 damage up to 4 times. It would dop, 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 dop. So in that situation, shields were of very little use to you. Whereas now it's going to do its damage in one pop. So that means that you're going to be able to negate that damage simply with the shield. So if combustion comes back into the meta, we may see the Bannerman getting more frequently featured in people's decks. And the other thing that's a potential slight buff is that previously it would do 200 damage, as said, in 50 damage, 50 HP increments, but you wouldn't get all 4 of those if the unit died during it. Whereas now it only does it in 1. So even if, say, you've got it on a statue with 1 HP left, it's still going to pop to do max damage. So a little bit of a buff in that situation. Overall, I think it's a nerf, but it's quite a fair change, so we'll keep this in the rebalances. Now, next up we have Shield Captain Avea. Again, this is a card that's received lots of changes. When she started out, she was awful. Now she's fairly strong, and she's getting some additional changes. Again, rebalance because there's some different changes in different directions. So her damage is going down from 100 to 90, but her health is going up from 450 to 500. So I've put it in rebalances, but I would probably say this is overall a buff because Shield Captain Avea is about getting that quest completed. If she's got more health, she's more likely to complete that quest. But of course, when we're talking about the damage dropping from 100 to 90, that means she's no longer going to single shot units that have 100 health. So she's no longer going to single shot things like tantrum throwers, spear throwers, dragon whelps, things like that, the ground based dragon whelps. So that's an important thing there. So we'll see how that change comes into fruition. So I think she's in an okay spot at the moment. Now here's a change again. Sunburn, a card that we've seen lots of changes to. So mana cost going up from 3 to 4, but it will no longer damage friendly minions. But it will still give friendly minions rage if they're in the area. Now we've had some, I feel like we've had some metas in the past where Sunburn's been very strong. The fact it no longer damages friendly minions is you can enrage lots of small things with it. So previously it would just kill Scrats and stuff. Now you could potentially buff Scrats as well as whatever else you're trying to buff. So Sunburn, got a bit of a rebalance there. We'll see how that goes. 4 mana, is it worth it? What else could you play for 4 mana instead? We'll see. Okay, so that's the rebalances. Now we'll look at the nerfs. Now, one of the cards that had been problematic was Kurnath Crystalbag. Now, of course, this was changed in the last patch where instead of it being your opponent triggering it, any spell would trigger it. So that got kind of out of control. And then if you had multiple Kurnaths, they would all trigger from one spell. That was hot fixed, so it wasn't quite as out of control. But now it's getting a bit more of a nerf. The ability range, so remember the ability is when a spell is cast, it will do 100 damage to the 3 closest enemies. Previously, that was global range, so it hit them wherever. Now that's down to 14. So that's a big change because 14 is effectively, it's the same range as a Harbinger. Now, if you think about a Harbinger on face, a Harbinger's basically just past the bridge when it's hitting face. So Kurnath Crystalbag's range is now about half of an arena. So I think that's a healthier change. There's not really anything else that has global range in the game at the moment. Previously, things like the Blast Mancer and the Spirit Mancer, they did have global range, but when they were brought into control a little bit, their range was brought down. So Kurnath's getting the similar sort of treatment here. Now, Scrapyard. If you've played, and especially I think if you've played duos in the current season, you will have played against many people playing Scrapyard. It was very, very strong. Again, this was a card that got changed in the last patch where it would only give you ground-based units, but it was still really strong, especially if you didn't have something to directly punish it. Now what they're changing about it here is the tech per mana cost. So remember, when it spits out an Outlander ground minion, it will consume tech based on the mana cost of that unit. It was previously consuming 10 tech per mana, now it's going to consume 13 tech per mana. So for example, an Annihilator, a 5 mana card, used to cost you 50 tech, now it's costing you 65 tech. So that should mean one of two things. Either people continue playing Scrapyard like they are, and they'll get less out of it, or they will have to wait longer to generate more tech. Because one of the things I noticed, especially, I didn't really play it too much in the last season, if at all, but one of the things I noticed is that people were quite happily just put the Scrapyard down straight out of the box as their first card. They didn't consider at all trying to build up any tech or anything like that. And that felt like that was kind of going against the ethos of the card. So we'll see if this changes it. It should make Scrapyards less... they'll produce less based on the same amount of tech, basically. Anyway, hopefully that'll bring Scrapyard into a bit more balance, because it was out of control. Right, here's a simple nerf to the Skeleton Horde. So remember, copies allowed is the number of copies you can have in your deck in duos. So this doesn't affect solos at all, and this is simply reducing the number of copies from 3 to 2 when played in duos. We had a few King Puff decks that were very, very strong, just utilizing 3 copies of this. It's a card that gives you a lot of bridge presence. Overall, they put out a lot of DPS, and for 4 mana, it was a very good card. So you can't quite have as many of them as you could previously. Now, Zealots are getting a similar change with regards to damage to Avea. So the damage from the Zealots is going down from 100 to 90. Again, Zealots, a card that recently got changed where it removed the self damage, and then suddenly they were meta everywhere. So a small damage reduction, but as I mentioned with Avea, it will no longer single shot things that it used to. So as mentioned, it will no longer kill things like Tantrum Throwers, Spear Throwers, Flightless Dragons, etc. in one hit. So the fact that it has to take 2 hits means that they trade a lot more negatively against these particular units. They'll take a lot longer to kill them. And also something like a Succubus that has 200 HP, you'll no longer be able to put your Zealots boom on it, bam, both hit them and kill her instantly. That won't happen anymore. So Zealots, small damage reduction, won't trade quite as efficiently as before, probably still be a decent card though. Okay, so those are the balance changes. Let me know in the comments what you think of them. Now let's quickly go through the bug fixes. So if you've seen units kind of skating around, kind of an appropriate verb to use for because it was mostly due to Frozen, hopefully they should be fixed now. There was an issue with Azog's interaction with Morelia's book causing a missing page. That's now been fixed. There was an issue with the decoy trap losing taunt after being stunned. Again, that's been fixed. Then we had an issue, a rare issue apparently, with the Sapphire Pebble where it wouldn't spawn all of them. Again, that's been fixed. Jade Flingers were not being affected by damage buffs. Guess what? That's been fixed. There were some emotes that were still showing at a low resolution. That's been fixed as well. There was situations where the Poison Strike was failing to sacrifice the Slitherbounds to get that extra poison damage. That's now been fixed. There was an issue with Morelia's book and ability cards making cards unplayable. That was something that I reported and I experienced, where you could end up with like your second card in your hand. You just couldn't use it, whatever it was, you just couldn't use it. That was very frustrating, but that's now been fixed. Prowler losing its ability to jump after being hypnotized, that's been fixed. And fixed an issue with minions and ability cards spawning frozen after defrost. I had to ask for a bit of clarification on this, but basically what happens is, for example, if you spawned an Azog during a Rimagal defrost period, Azog would be frozen. If you then use the ability, every other time you spawned Azog, even after the defrost had finished, it would still remain frozen. So that's something that's been fixed. Okay, and there we go. That is patch 1.36, the third and final expansion in the Frost Dragon's Lair, part of the Minion Masters saga. If you're enjoying the content here in the Fish Tank, please hit that subscribe button. It really does help out, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Let me know in the comments what you think about the changes. What do you think about the new cards? What do you think about the new skin and cosmetics? Love to get your guys' input on that. But yeah, without any further ado, that is the conclusion of today's video. Thanks so much for taking part and watching. My name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll see you guys again soon here in the Fish Tank. Take care.